I'm Lisa Berkley with Reed Price in the back end of this. So thank you, Reed, for your engagement. And with our special guest speaker, James Doty. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, but first let me give you an introduction to this webinar series, Reaction to Response, which is a twice-a-month, year-long webinar series birthed through the Charter of Compassion Women and Girls sector. And we're launching today, International Women's Day, in honor of the power of feminine leadership, which is generally inclusive and relational, intending to inspire and engage more people to move from a reactive and responsive behavior at the local, national, and international levels. So let me just give you a little bit of background around the Charter for Compassion. We're a thriving global network of more than 400 cities and regions of compassion in over 50 countries with nearly 1,700 partners organized in 11 sectors of society. Women and Girls is the 11th sector, the newest sector, and the Charter for Compassion is the document that is affirmed by all of our partners and applied at the center of all decision and policy making for the cities and regions of compassion. Our vision in the women and girls sector is to elevate the work of our partners and our community to improve condition and advance solutions for women and girls for global transformation. Before I give you a little bit more information about our guest, Dr. James Doty, I'd like to just go over a bit of housekeeping. At different times in the call, Dr. Doty will invite some questions from you, in which case you can please post them in the Q&A or chat section. And please, because of time, be direct with your questions so we can get to as many questions as possible. Also on the subject of technology, if you have any problems or questions, you can go to zoom.us and get some help from their help section, or you can feel free to call out to us in the chat section, and Reed, our back-end savior, will give you any information you need. Lastly, you can find us on Facebook at Reaction to Response, as well as a hyperlink on the lower right-hand side of the Charter for Compassion's website. So today's guest speaker is Dr. James Doty. He's the professor of the Department of Neurosurgery and the founder and the director of the Center for Compassion and Altruistic Research and Education, also known as C-CARE, at the Stanford School of Medicine. In his book, Into the Magic Shop, A Neurosurgeon's Quest to Discover the Mysteries of the Brain and Secrets of the Heart, Dr. Doty talks about his challenging childhood. When he was 12 years old, he wandered into a magic shop and met a woman who saw the potential in him and taught him how to manifest his greatest desires through a series of techniques and meditative exercises. With her, he learned a unique relationship between the brain and the heart that led to incredible success and happiness in life. Dr. Doty collaborates with scientists from a number of disciplines examining the neural basis for compassion and altruism. He's an inventor, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, and his work has been published in a variety of research journals. Also, in our pre-conversation, he mentioned his book has been translated now into 24 languages, which just goes to attest to the fact that we really need to be moving from a reactive to responsive way of communicating, and that there's really a call for love, care, and compassion. Lastly, Dr. Doty shared with me before this call that he's done a talk at a TEDx talk at the UN on women's issues and feminism, and considering we're an International Day of Women, I'm going to turn this over to him and let him share with you some of his stories and thoughts on that. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Doty.
Good morning, Lisa. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and it's also wonderful to be here on International Women's Day, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thank you. So would you like to share with us some of your talk from the Women's Day, the Feminist Conference, and talk that you gave on women's issues?
Sure. Actually, this was probably a year and a half or 2 years ago, but it was part of a TEDx UN Plaza meeting. And I was asked to speak on women's empowerment and feminism and compassion. And it's interesting because
Dr. Doty, can you just move a little closer? It's hard to hear, a little closer to your mic because we can't hear you very well.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes, I believe so. Hold on. We're getting some back end comments. Oh, we want to hear them. So I think we're good. Okay.
What I was talking about was this talk, and it was about women's empowerment, feminism, and compassion. And the Dalai Lama once said that Western women will save the world. Now, I'm not quite sure why he picked Western women, but the comment that women will save the world, I think, is particularly profound. What I did in that conversation was actually explore the evolution of gender roles back from prehistoric times and its evolution into culture, society, and religion. And also this discussion about how women are desiring a different role than has traditionally been present, at least in Western society and many other societies, such that they can take on roles without being judged or prejudiced against that are oftentimes considered male roles. But the interesting thing about this too is that as we have evolved in modern society, there's now also recognition that men want to take on different roles as well. And really the whole point about this is recognizing each of our humanity and having it independent of traditionally accepted roles, and let people actually be who they are or who they wish to be. And whether it's male or female or black or white or a particular religion, really what the Charter is all about, and what I think we are as a species really should be about, is allowing every person to manifest their potential and support them and understand that each of us is suffering, and we're trying to survive, do well, be our best in the context of often very difficult circumstances. And when you recognize that about yourself and acknowledge that, and then when you see that as a reality within others, then it allows you to embrace them and hopefully support them as they try to manifest their best selves.
For you, when we're speaking about manifesting our best selves, needless to say, that's going to tie into compassion. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is compassion? And you also mentioned some things around gender. Is there a greater reflection of gender related to culture or gender? I said that backwards, I'm sorry. Is there a greater, around compassion, does it reflect differently in different genders and or cultures?
Well, I think that's true, and I won't pretend to be an expert, but let me define compassion, at least as we as scientists do, and that is the recognition of another's suffering with a motivational desire to alleviate that suffering. People confuse these different terms. As an example, kindness is a desire to care for another or be helpful to another, but it doesn't necessarily have any relationship to suffering. Oftentimes people use the term empathy as an equivalent of compassion, but in the context of neuroscience, we look at empathy as taking on the emotional state of another. And again, it's not necessarily pain or suffering, it could actually be joy. And then we have pity, which is actually, in some ways, a derogatory term, because it's one perceiving another from a superior position instead of being at an equivalent position. And so you need to sort of understand these terms when you use them, because many people use them at least in the context of how we do research, incorrectly.
Hmm. That's very interesting. I had never heard the difference between empathy and compassion expressed this way. So when people are looking to become more compassionate, what can they do?
Well, and I don't want to just push my book, which I'm, but to just give you a little backstory that will lead, hopefully, to help answer that question. I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was an invalid. She had had a stroke, was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, and was chronically depressed, had attempted suicide multiple times. We were on public assistance. Neither had gone to college. We had been evicted from multiple homes. And that's certainly not the environment which typically would be associated with what's defined as success in our society, or living a fruitful life or manifesting your potential. But what fortunately happened to me was, at the age of 12, as I was transitioning into becoming a juvenile delinquent, I walked into a magic shop, and I had a lot of anger, hostility, negativism, hopelessness. And in this magic shop was a woman who was not the owner. She was actually the mother of the owner, and she knew nothing about magic. But what she did know about was people. And as a 12-year-old who frankly was lost, she really took time to really connect with me. And I describe her as an earth mother type. And in this fairly short conversation of 20 to 30 minutes, at the end of it, she said to me, I really like you, and I think I could teach you something that could change your life. And she said, I'm here for the next 6 weeks, and if you show up every day, I'll teach you. And frankly, I wish I could tell you I had some insight, but I had none at all. The only reason I showed up was, frankly, I had nothing else to do, and she gave me some cookies. But what happened over that 6-week period of time was she gave me incredible insight into myself, the nature of suffering, and also tools to overcome my own suffering. And before we used mindfulness or meditation as a common term, or even understood the concept of neuroplasticity, this woman, and this was in 1968, already had an understanding of these very deeply. And while I didn't get to know her personally very well at all, I have to assume that she had some background in Eastern religions. But the first thing that she taught me, which I talk about actually in the book, and in fact offer some meditations on the website, was the fact that many of us are suffering, and that suffering is manifested by stress, anxiety, and as you probably know, in Western society, we have an epidemic of that associated with depression, because frankly, we were not meant to function in this modern world where all these demands are placed upon us. And as a result, this anxiety, this stress is transmitted into your body and affects your physiology. It affects the muscles. And many of us are going around our lives with clenched cheeks and tight muscles, and having actually an inability to focus because of this anxiety and stress that we have. And the first thing she taught me was this reality of this, and actually how to relax the muscles in my body. And this allowed me to be present, because what happens for many people is, as a species, we have a perception of a past and an understanding of a future. And many people spend a large percentage of their life regretting the past of what I could have done, should have done, or having anxiety about a future which they have no control over. And instead of being present and being able to connect with somebody, and when you do that, actually, that allows one to be their best selves. Because if you're not present, you're elsewhere, clearly. And so she taught me that. And to accomplish anything in life, you have to have the ability to attend and be present. It allows for human connection, but it also allows for learning, understanding, and accomplishment. From there, she taught me that for many of us, we have a negative dialogue that goes on in our head. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not handsome enough. I am not successful enough. And many of us believe that that dialogue actually represents us. And in fact, that dialogue is an artificial dialogue that has been created that frankly has nothing to do with us. Yet we beat ourselves up every day. And what she taught me was actually this reality. And I was very guilty of this. And as a result, once I realized this, she gave me the ability actually to change that narrative to one of affirmation, positivity, and if you will, allowed me to change the channel that was going on in my head. And so once I was no longer beating myself up, this allowed me then to be kind to myself, love myself. And when you can be kind to yourself and love yourself, then it allows you actually to see the world a bit more clearly and not be so self-involved and think that you're the only one who has problems. It allows you to see that everyone has problems. Everyone is suffering, perhaps not as you are, but the suffering may be just as great in a different way. Poor people suffer, rich people suffer. And that recognition allowed me to dissipate a lot of the anger and hostility that I had. Additionally, the recognition that events are neither good nor bad, they're simply events. And we attribute good or bad to an event. And I used to have a lot of anger and hostility about my situation, about the failings of my parents. But ultimately, I realized that they were having their own struggles, and it wasn't about me so much. It was just that they were having a difficult time coping. And as a result, the anger and hostility that I had about my own situation, the despair I had, was alleviated. And I just recognized that they just are. And that was huge.
So you've mentioned a few things that have really caused me to think a little bit. One is about your body and how the body, the tension in the body can hold the anger and it'll prevent us from being present. And you've also mentioned generational pain and trauma. And I'm wondering if you feel that, or what your thoughts are on transgenerational or intergenerational trauma that gets carried on through the cells or through the DNA, and how working with the mind and compassion can help shift that so we can really become more present.
Sure, and a number of studies have now been done that, in fact, confirm what
Can
you
you
just
come a little closer to the mic?
Sure.
Sorry. Thank you.
What I was saying is that a number of studies have been done now that actually demonstrate the reality of your statement. A lot of people who've had trauma in their lives transmit that trauma to their children and onward, and it can have a very negative, deleterious effect on their lives. The great thing, though, is that with the knowledge that we are obtaining from the work that I do and that other people do in the context of how this occurs, the reality that compassion, if you will, or the ability to extend compassion has a genetic representation, that there is a epigenetic phenomenon whereby when one is stressed, it results in the release of proteins that are associated with inflammation or other deleterious types of effects. And that with some of these mental practices, you can actually alter the expression of your genes. And in fact, you can actually see this with as little as 15 or 20 minutes in the right circumstance. And we recognize that many diseases that affect humans are secondary to inflammation, they're secondary to stress, they're secondary to anxiety. And when we can give people insight into this and tools to alleviate that, it can be quite profound. I use the statement that you cannot release yourself from prison until you know you were in a prison. And so by giving people insight into the things that perhaps limit them, by giving them exercises and tools that allow them to understand themselves better and connect with others better. Let me give you an example. When an individual is stressed or anxious, that typically is a result of stimulation of their sympathetic nervous system, which is our flight or fight response. And it correlates with decreased tone or decreased innervation of the vagus nerve, which is this nerve that connects your brainstem to your heart and other organs in your body. When that happens, you have a release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. You have the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. You have a depression in your immune system. You have something called a decrease in heart rate variability.
Okay.
And as a result of that, your blood pressure goes up, your cardiac function is diminished, your ability to fight infections is diminished, and ultimately it has effect on your longevity or your telomere length, which is the end of your genes that are associated with longevity. But what we can do is we can teach an individual a technique to increase their vagal tone, engage their parasympathetic nervous system, and what happens? The exact opposite. Your immune system is boosted, your cortisol levels are diminished, your cardiac function is improved, your peripheral vascular function is improved, and this area of your brain that is associated with discernment and thoughtful engagement. You know, when you talked about the title of this series, Reaction to Response, Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was in a concentration camp, talks about the pause between stimulus and response. And what happens for many people is that that response is where everything good or bad happens. If your sympathetic nervous system is engaged and you're anxious and stressed, you make a reactive decision, not a thoughtful decision.
Right.
It can be very bad for you. If you take the time to pause and engage your parasympathetic nervous system, and that results in engagement or the best performance of what we call your executive control function, which allows for much better discernment and engagement in terms of past experiences to make the best decision. It's also associated with increased creativity and increased productivity. And we can teach individuals to diminish their stress, engage their parasympathetic nervous system, and actually this is what will ultimately allow you to be your best self, not only in regard to how you treat yourself, but how you treat others.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So we have a question from somebody, one of our participants, who says, we need to heal ourselves, and what can we do to help things in our tumultuous world become more open-hearted?
Well, that's a good question. There cannot be peace in the outer world until you have inner peace. That's said by more than one person. And in many ways, that's true. What I tell people is that each of us have what I describe as wounds of the heart. And for most of us, those wounds are superficial and they heal quickly. But for some of us, they're deep and they continue to cause pain, they continue to bleed. And it's these deep wounds of the heart that are manifested by negative behaviors. And they're ultimately the cause of war. They're the cause of poverty. And it's due to deep suffering. And until we focus our technology, our science, ourselves on healing these wounds, there's not going to be peace in the world. It's easy to look outward and say, well, if this happened and this happened and that happened, there would be peace in the world. The fact of the matter is, if you look inward, that's where you're going to ultimately create peace in the world. And many of us don't appreciate that because of our own suffering, we are not making the best decisions for ourselves. We're not being our best selves, because it's much easier to look out and identify problems with other people. And it's this self-knowledge, when you recognize that you can't force people to change, you can't create change by criticism. The only way you can create change is by love.
Right, right.
Because that creates trust, it creates engagement, and that is what allows for change.
You remind me, you know, you point one finger at somebody and you've got three pointing back at yourself, you know, so look inward. Do you, one of the questions that has also come up is, if people are living and working in a toxic environment, so it's not possible, like opening the heart it perpetuates the wounds that you're talking about. Do you have any suggestions of how, or techniques or practices that people can do to both protect themselves from the outside toxicity, but still maintain an open heart?
Well, it can be very challenging. As an example, the easiest thing would be to say leave. But as an example, if you are a fairly young person and you're married and you have a child and you have this particular job and it's a toxic environment, but the reality is there are no other jobs available, you need to make, unfortunately, certain sacrifices oftentimes to take care of your family and your responsibilities. And it isn't always possible to just leave and do something else. And so you shouldn't beat yourself up because of that. But that being said, you can protect yourself. You can not engage, because typically to fight, you have to have two people involved.
Right.
This isn't to say that you pull back and you don't have integrity or values, but you also don't have to have a negative response or carry anger. Again, it gets back to my own childhood, which was not ideal. What happens to many people is every day they wake up angry and hostile, and it's like forgiveness. When you've been wronged and you don't forgive people, every day you carry this, and this is like a poison that you drink somehow thinking it's going to magically affect the other person or the situation, and it doesn't. So by not having that anger and hostility, that in of itself is very powerful, because when you run across a toxic person, they're suffering and they want to engage you so they can justify their own behavior. And when you simply respond by not responding, that actually can be very, very powerful. And again, this is not running away. It's not shrieking from them. It's simply you are not responding to their toxicity. And oftentimes that can have a powerful effect. And in fact, I tell people that when people who you work with are in situations where someone comes on very aggressively, of course, the easiest thing is to have that same aggressive response back. But then if you suddenly stop and pause for a moment and say, well, geez, maybe this has nothing to do with me really, but it's because they're having their own issues and their own pain, and I'm simply here in front of them, and it's manifesting this way. Let me give you a very quick example. I'm sure you've had somebody cut you off as you're driving and probably cause you to have an accident. Our first response, there are typically two, right? One is a hand gesture, and one is a expletive. And you feel perfectly justified because you have created the narrative in your head that the reason they cut you off is because they're completely insensitive and they're jerks. But what if I told you that the person behind the wheel of the car was a husband? He's with his wife. She's 9 months pregnant. Her water's broken. She's bleeding.
Mm.
He's trying to get her to the hospital.
Right.
You feel the same way.
Yeah, totally different.
Correct. And in a microsecond, I have changed your view of a situation. A microsecond.
Right.
You have the capacity to change your view exactly like that.
Right.
So instead of having that immediate desire to have an expletive, to do a finger gesture, you can sit there and instead reflect on that maybe their behavior had nothing to do with them being a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be kind, you can be forgiving, and you can take a moment to just sit with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sit there and say, how can I help them? What is it that I can do? Because you see, you've taken it from being about you, which is this response, right?
Right.
Being about another.
Or the reaction, right, to the response, right, right. Okay, wow. That's why it's good. It's very, very good advice. So we have a whole bunch of questions that are popping up on this screen. So let's see. There's two. This is Dr. Doty. Today there's a women's strike, and we recently saw global women's marches all across the planet. Are these possibly public examples of love?
I think that's absolutely correct. And it shows the power of love.
Mm-hmm.
And we mustn't forget that,
Mm-hmm.
that there is no situation in the world where there has been a despot, a dictator, that has not been manifested by an extraordinarily small minority of people,
Mm-hmm.
one person. But it is with the complacence of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see here, when there is a coordinated, engaged statement that is positive, that is associated with righteousness, and I'm not talking about righteousness in regard to a political or religious dogma,
Mm-hmm.
but a righteousness based on our humanity, our common humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We can change the world.
Yeah.
And we mustn't ever forget that. And nothing can happen without the complacency of others. As you, of course, know, in Germany with Hitler,
Mm-hmm.
there was a statement that said, when they came for the socialists, I stood by because I wasn't one.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of it, there was no one left for you to protect you.
Right.
And this is why it's so, so critically important that whether it's with women's issues, whether it's with sexual orientation, cultural issues, religious issues, that we recognize our common humanity and that we are an advocate and a soldier for love.
Mm-hmm. So you just tapped right into one of the other questions, which said someone, I can't tell from where they are, but they say, Dr. Doty, you say your childhood was not ideal, but it appears that it was because it produced you, the current sum of your parts. How do we remember that stress and regret and keep in mind that what we cannot control is actually always perfect?
Well, I think that's an incredible insight. Obviously, who I am today and who each of us is a manifestation of our experience. But for many people, that experience, that negative experience, or that life experience can leave profound, deep wounds. And while they can create wisdom, they can also result in significant scars. That being said, if you ask most people in terms of their greatest lessons, they're oftentimes as a result of suffering. And suffering does allow us to be able then to look at others and recognize that their behaviors are oftentimes manifestations of their own suffering, and it's getting back to the same point.
Mhm.
But depending on where someone is in their life, or as an example, the gift I was given to run across somebody who cared,
Mhm.
not everyone has experienced that, and they still hold their suffering, and it hasn't given them the insight or the wisdom. It's just given them pain. And this is actually something we all should recognize: is each of us has the ability to positively change someone's life every day. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. It doesn't matter what job you are. It doesn't matter what position you have. Each of us has the ability to care for another and improve their life every day. And if you look at the world in that way, when you help someone, when you reach out to another person, when you care, it's actually a very selfish act,
Mhm.
because it allows your own healing, and it's actually a gift to you.
Mhm. That's beautiful. Thank you. Wow. So I'm aware of our time. We have about 15, 20 minutes left. I'm going to open this up a little bit more to questions. But before I do that, would you be willing to take a few minutes and maybe lead us through either a meditation or something that has very practical skills that people can take with them after this call, that they can start to engage in practice to become to live a little bit more compassionately?
Well, let me give you 2 bits of information and share a story which will actually answer your question, or
Okay.
give you what you want, I hope. One is there are an immense number of resources at the website at Stanford related to the work that I do there. And that website is ccare, ccare.stanford.edu. The other is related to the book, intothemagicshop.com. And there's a section there called podcast, and that actually relates to what I'm going to talk about, and is in fact related to the practice that I do now, which is a meditative practice. It's actually fairly short,
Mhm.
but for me, it sets my intention every day, and it puts me in the right frame of mind throughout the day.
That's perfect.
And I was asked a few years ago to speak to the medical students who were just starting at my alma mater. And it was a great honor for me. This is called the White Coat Ceremony. And I reflected about my own journey, my own path, and in fact, the lessons that I had learned that allowed me to be who I am today.
Mhm.
And I wanted to make it simple, and it came out in the form of a mnemonic. And it's 10 letters of the alphabet, starting with C. And in fact, going through these 10 letters of the alphabet is my practice every morning and throughout the day. And it begins with C. We talked about having compassion for yourself. So it's compassion for self and others, recognizing the dignity of every person, understanding that you're not above anybody, and that the only way you can truly engage is eye to eye.
Mhm.
E is practicing equanimity. As we talked about, some of the greatest lessons we learn are when we suffer, but obviously none of us want to always suffer. But the other aspect of this is that oftentimes people get lost in trying to grasp at events, things that make them feel better, sometimes just transiently, hoping that they can sustain this, if you will, high. The greatest gift you can give yourself is having evenness of temperament, where you're not lost in the highs or the lows,
Mhm.
because we almost always come back to center. And when we're not grasping, but we appreciate good events, and we also understand that we can learn from suffering, but even those events are often transitory, then we can maintain this evenness of spirit and not have this emotional response that has a huge negative physiologic effect frequently, and allows you to connect with people. F is forgiveness. We also talked about that. All of us have done negative actions towards others, and we will have them done to us. And it's not to forget, but it's not to be lost in anger and hostility towards another, because it only negatively affects you. G is having gratitude. So many of us forget that just the ability to even be on this computer speaking with each other exceeds what most people have the capability of doing in the world. Remember, the average person in the world lives on less than $2 a day. So we are blessed, and all of us are blessed in some way. And there are people who are suffering much, much more than us. So having gratitude for our position instead of looking up and wanting to be someone else or wishing you had something that someone else had. H is humility. Again, not having the sense of self-import or that you are somehow better than another person. I is having integrity and values, a set of ideals, a set of values that you try to live by. J is justice, and it gets back to, again, having gratitude and understanding that we have a responsibility because of our position to care for the vulnerable. K is kindness, the active component of compassion, the ability to just simply reach out and be kind to another person, to embrace another person. And it doesn't have to be for any reason. It just can be because of who you are. And that has a huge, huge, powerful effect because it creates ripples. And we know this through science. And all contained by love.
That's pretty beautiful. Thank you. One of the questions that came up is, how can we grow more C-cares beyond Stanford?
Well, we already are. We have a number of academic institutions all throughout the world who've been inspired by the work that we do at C-care, and now are doing research in this area. In fact, many people would tell you that because of C-care, the fact that it's based at Stanford has given credibility to the study of these behaviors in the context of academia. And I cannot tell you the number of emails and letters I've gotten from graduate or postgraduate students thanking me and C-care for our existence because it has legitimized this field as a worthy field of study. Just to mention, in June, the Handbook of Compassion Science is to be published by Oxford University Press, which of course is one of the most prestigious academic presses. And I'm the senior editor of that, and that brings together all the latest research in this entire field by scientists all over the world. And like I said, we have groups in South America, Australia, Japan, Europe, all now engaged in this type of work. And I certainly don't want to take all the credit, but I do believe that the work that we have done has helped move this whole field forward.
Well, you just, excuse me, just touched into another couple of questions. One, in your estimation, is compassion increasing or decreasing worldwide?
There's an impression that compassion is decreasing as a result of, unfortunately, sort of the 24/7 news cycle and the refugee crises that are happening all over the world. One of the problems with our evolution as a species is that when things are going great, we are relaxed and we're not particularly engaged. As a species, we are designed to look for potential threat. And this engages our sympathetic nervous system, as we discussed. Well, news organizations, the reason they promote 24/7 violence and negativity is because you have a tendency then to engage because it stimulates fear. And politicians are very good at doing this, as we have recently seen in our recent election. And news organizations do this because they are in the business of making money. But the reality is, and there's a wonderful book that tracks violence over centuries, and I believe it's Steven Pinker, and it's something about the better angels, or you can find that, I can't remember right now, but it actually demonstrates that throughout the world, actually violence has significantly decreased. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you look much in contrast to what Mr. Trump says, major violence in almost every major city throughout the world is actually dramatically decreased than it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So overall, actually, we are making progress, and I think that, and I believe it's true, that it is a better world than it was. And in fact, society, culture, the world could not function if we did not have well over 95% of people doing the right thing.
Wow. Well, thank you. You've certainly given us some very practical tools for doing the right thing, which also brings us to a couple of things in closing. But before I get into the logistical sides of those things, is there anything that you would like to say to participants or to people who will be watching this video in closing?
Well, we do know it's obviously International Women's Day, and really, for most of us, the model for unconditional love is our mothers. Hmm. And if we can sit with that and understand the power of our mother's love and try to give that gift to everyone around us, I think that's the best we can ask for any of us.
You give me goosebumps on that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Doty, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And we invite people to go to CCare's website, which is ccare.stanford.edu. And there you can find more videos, and also you can go to Into the Magic Shop. Did I get that right? Into the Magic Shop .com to see information about Dr. Doty's book. As well, for those who are on this call, we are, if you see now on your screen, if you go to Reaction to Response on Facebook, we will continue this conversation online, because one of the significant aspects to this webinar series is the ongoing conversations online, where we can see and support how people are engaging the wisdom of our speakers into their communities. And if I didn't mention it yet, I will now say too that you will receive a follow-up email with a copy of this video. And I think that is pretty much it. So we thank you all, everyone who's been here, for your help, your support. May we all go out in the world and make it a little bit better. One breath of compassion and one act, even more importantly, of compassion for self and for others. And that's it so much. So thank you again, Dr. Doty.
You're welcome.
Peace be with everyone. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.